Just checking in again in response to your most recent discussion forum. This is just going to be a quick set of responses to some of the sort of interesting debates that you guys have been having on the discussion forum, and also just a couple of little notes about how we can keep the momentum going in those discussions in the coming weeks, because I've been impressed by your contributions so far. First of all, one of the key sort of debates that went on in all of the discussions, virtually all of the discussions, was over whether Odysseus can be, first of all, whether he can be considered a hero at all, and second of all, to what extent our position as modern readers conditions our response to him as a heroic figure. So Paula and Destiny were both very interested in whether he qualifies as an epic hero, whether his actions deserve the title of that, and maybe also contrasting him in interesting ways with modern superheroes. So what I would say is that you've really identified a key issue here, which is Odysseus's tendency to brag, right, to self-aggrandize and talk about his own brilliance and his own ingeniousness. And Jessica points out that while reading this, we may find this a little bit jarring, because we praise people who, in our society, we tend to praise people who are humble. Now, I might question that and say that we often venerate people who are sort of quite braggadocious, sort of loudmouths and whatever, but our fictional heroes are often very self-effacing, and so it is a little jarring to see this hero who doesn't really conform to that. What I would say is that what Odysseus maybe shares in common with those modern superheroes is that he represents something bigger than himself. He represents an idea beyond himself. When a Greek hero brags, it's not just that they're saying, well, I'm really great. It's that they are inheritors of a lineage, right? So they often talk about their fathers and their grandfathers and the importance of those sort of figures to them. So they inherit these names that bring with them a certain duty to carry out heroic deeds. And so declaring that they are great heroes is fulfilling part of their obligation as a sort of natural aristocracy. And that idea of a natural aristocracy, where your bloodline gives you a sense of heroism, but it also brings with it the obligation to carry out heroic deeds and to trumpet your lineage, is maybe what explains the tendency to brag on the part of Odysseus. However, and it is true that that's very different to a figure like, say, Batman, who wants to hide his own identity and wants to make sure that he is not known and is supposed to be anonymous. But both of them are, in very different ways, giving up themselves to a greater idea, something beyond themselves, whether that's their lineage or whether that's Gotham City as a whole. What I would say is that it has been noted by a couple of people in the discussions that his bragging when they're escaping the Cyclops is not just a flaw that we notice as modern readers. His men also regard it as a flaw, and they see it as like, well, you're endangering us by doing this. Why would you say who you are? And that brings the wrath of the gods upon them. It is a mistake on his part. So that there is a sort of balance here that his bragging is crucial to his heroism, and that's very different to our concept of heroism. But on the other hand, it's recognized as being a problem, even within the text. I did really enjoy the idea of using superheroes and contrasting our conception of heroism as it's manifested in those movies and comics, contrasting that with something like the Odyssey, as a really interesting example of the effect of reading across time and how reading across time causes us to sort of, take a step back and say, well, that's kind of a shocking thing to see, or that's something very different or outside of the realm of my experience or my conception of heroism. And that's really what reading across time is all about, is those moments of discomfort, right? So it was really great to see people leaning towards that and trying to see, well, where does that take us in terms of our interpretation of the Odyssey. That was brilliant. In a related note, William had what I regarded as probably the best post of the whole discussion forum when he was talking about the framing narrative. And I had asked if, what you regarded as the significance of the fact that the most famous parts of the Odyssey, all of those adventures, the land of the Cyclops and the Lotus Eaters and Aeolus and all of that sort of stuff, are all kind of buried in a story within the story. They're not actually part of the main narrative. And I said, well, what's the significance of that? Or does it change the way we think about it? Was it unexpected to you if you hadn't encountered the text before, but were kind of familiar with those stories? And William points out that the framing narrative is in some ways correcting the legend. So we see when Odysseus arrives, visits Alcinous and other places, that his legend is already spread around the ancient world. There are already songs being sung about him, songs just like the Odyssey that inflate his legend and make him incredibly superheroic. And his story is actually full of all of his flaws and all of his mistakes and all of his weaknesses, so that in a sense the framing narrative actually deflates the big story, because the Odyssey is the story of his heroism. When Odysseus himself starts to tell his story, what we get is a much more humble thing, a man much more aware of his own flaws and his own weaknesses and the mistakes he's made along this journey. And so that it's a really interesting thing going on here, where this story is criticizing itself. It's calling its own basis into question. And I think that was a brilliant insight. The idea of this legend being deflated while it's being told, and also ruminating on the idea of storytelling itself as a kind of flawed process. And I think that was really great. So thank you for that. This week you guys are reading a lot more modern stuff, and you're reading Tennyson and Keats and Brodsky and Atwood and Barth and Zimmerman and Mason, and I hope you're enjoying those texts and getting something out of them. And I hope you're getting a feel for how those writers sort of read across time, how they deploy the text of the Odyssey, or redeploy or reinterpret or even just change the text of the Odyssey. If you think about what Atwood is doing, she's just changing it. She adds things that were just not there in the original text. And it's worth asking yourself, well, why are they doing this? And it's maybe not so much about correcting an ancient text. It's more thinking about the modern audience, because their audience is not ancient Greeks and it's not Homer. So what, I wonder, are these writers trying to do to a modern audience, or what sort of effect are they trying to have on us as a modern audience? And I'd like to know what you think about that. I will have 2 chances to see your responses to this, because you will be responding to on the discussion forum, but you'll also be using this reading as part of your first minor assignment, the reading across time assignment. I hope the instructions of that were clear and you're able to take from it what you will. It's relatively open in terms of what you want to do, because you don't have to draw on every text you're reading this week. You only have a very limited space in which to make an argument, so don't feel like you have to talk about Atwood and Tennyson and Brodsky and everybody. You don't have to talk about everybody at all. I would ask that you draw upon Damrosch's essay, but I'm looking forward to seeing what your response is. I would say that the minor assignment is a fairly low stakes thing. It is an opportunity to make even make mistakes. We learn a lot more from mistakes than we do from just feeling like we got everything right. So don't be afraid to take chances. If you have a cool idea, roll the dice on it, and I'll give you my feedback or my thoughts, but I don't want this to be an assignment where people feel like they're going to be caught out. This is your first chance to really express yourself in a more expansive way, so I want you to take that chance. Do get in touch if the instructions are not terribly clear in the prompt, if there's any aspect of it that you're not sure about. I hope the rubric is clear, and I hope all of the other stuff is helpful, but it really is intended to be helpful. So if there is anything that doesn't make sense to you, just ask. One thing I would say about the discussions, first of all, they've been great. I've really liked reading your discussions, and I really like your willingness to challenge one another and disagree with one another. I would suggest that people try and draw on the extra readings in the modules a little bit more. Not just the stuff that's in the modules, but readings that you've encountered or sources. When you're talking about superheroes and stuff like that, that's good. If you could give specific examples of that, that's better. If you can draw on the sort of videos and the websites and stuff like that we've been talking about to sort of direct one another towards things that might help people with their thinking about these texts, that's even better again. And so some people maybe drop one or two points on those discussions. That's not a big deal. It's not going to affect your grade hugely, but you want to be getting full marks for these discussions, and I think the discussions have, for the most part, deserved that. So make sure you're staying ahead of that. Even if you haven't dropped points yet, be aware of that. It is important, and I do want to push that a little more, that you're not just agreeing and disagreeing with each other, but that you're supporting one another's learning by pointing out resources that are available. So take a little bit of time to browse around those things. Next week we're going to start looking at reading across cultures, and we'll start that by once again reading an ancient Greek text, but we're only going to look at it for a week, and then we're going to be concentrating on Wole Soyinka, Death and the King's Horseman. So I wanted to read Sophocles, Oedipus Rex, very carefully, but mainly to get a feel for what Greek tragedy looks like, how the stagecraft of it maybe works, and maybe how it differs from your experience of theatre. Some of you may have considerable experience of Greek theatre, but most of you maybe don't. And thinking about the form of it, and especially looking at what role is played by the chorus in this play is kind of an interesting question, I think. Another interesting question will be, what are the sort of motivations behind Oedipus's actions throughout the play at each stage, and as he finds out his own tragic fate? And we're going to be rethinking those questions, what did influence him or what motivated him, when we start looking at Death and the King's Horseman, where there are very different motivations, but there are some striking parallels between the plays, both in terms of the structure of it, like the choral structure of Greek tragedy, and some profound differences with Nigerian drama, and also some key thematic similarities between the fate of Oedipus and the fate of various characters in Soyinka's work. So, but first things first, let's immerse ourselves for a little while in Greek tragedy. There are resources now available for Unit 2 of your course. They're there in course modules, so if there's anything you're not sure about, try having a look through that stuff, but always feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions. I'm always happy to field anything you've got. Other than that, keep up the good work. It's been real fun for me so far. Feel free also to get in touch if you have any suggestions about what could help you, what will help you get where you need to be going. Okay, thank you.